My daughter looked me in the eye at my son's funeral and told me to stop crying. Not quietly, not privately, in front of 43 people who had come to mourn Caius, his college friends, his colleagues, our neighbor Verity, who had watched him take his first steps on that front lawn, 41 years ago. "You're making a scene," Vesper said. I was holding Caius's photograph, the one from his engineering graduation, the one where he had Seraphine's eyes and my jawline, and the whole future still ahead of him. I set it down. "Pack your bags," Vesper said. Her voice didn't waver. "You have 30 days. This is my house now, and I need you to start accepting that." The room didn't go silent, it went still. There's a difference. Silence is absence. Still is everyone holding their breath at the same moment, waiting to see what a man does when his own daughter dismantles him in public on the worst day of his life. My name is Leander Ashford. I am 67 years old. I built the house Vesper was standing in with my own hands and my own money in the summer of 1979. I poured the concrete foundation the same week Seraphine told me she was pregnant with Caius. I framed the walls during her second trimester. I hung the front door the morning we brought him home from the hospital, still wet with paint, Seraphine laughing at me for not waiting. 45 years of my life lived inside those walls. 45 years of tax receipts, insurance renewals, utility bills, and maintenance logs. All of them filed, dated, and organized in a 4-drawer cabinet in my basement that Vesper had never once opened. I said nothing. Not because I had nothing to say. I had 45 years of things to say. I said nothing because I had already decided how this was going to end, and the ending required one thing above everything else: patience. Vesper had spent 48 hours after Caius died moving through our home like the deed had already transferred, rearranging furniture, redirecting caterers, accepting condolences with the gravity of someone who had lost a husband, not a brother. She had pulled Verity aside at the door and whispered that I was struggling with reality and that she would handle everything from here. What Vesper didn't know was what was sitting in that basement cabinet. She didn't know the name printed on every document inside it. She didn't know about the trust, the one Seraphine and I had established in 1977, 2 years before Caius was even born. She didn't know what was in it, what it was worth, or who it protected. She was about to find out, but not today. Not with her voice still hanging in the air of a house she had never owned and never would. I picked up my coffee cup. I walked to the kitchen sink, the one I'd installed myself in 1986, Italian tile backsplash, Seraphine's choice, and I rinsed it slowly. "All right," I said. Vesper heard surrender. I meant something else entirely. If this story is already hitting something deep, if you've ever been dismissed by someone who had no idea what you were actually carrying, drop a comment right now and tell me where in the world you're watching from. I want to know. Hit the like button, subscribe to Dorian's Revenge Stories, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's coming next. The best part of this story hasn't even started yet, and trust me, you do not want to miss what Vesper finds out next. People see what they expect to see. That is the thing I have learned after 67 years of quiet living. Show a man in an old cardigan driving a 12-year-old Volvo, and people construct a story around him before he opens his mouth. They decide what he is worth. They decide what he needs. They decide what he couldn't possibly have managed on his own. Vesper had been constructing her story about me for years. Let me tell you the real one. I graduated from the University of Ohio in 1979 with a civil engineering degree and $17 in my pocket. Not a metaphor. 17 actual dollars, a scholarship debt I'd already paid off working summers, and an absolute certainty that I was going to build something that lasted. Seraphine used to say I came into the world with a level in one hand and a blueprint in the other. She wasn't entirely wrong. I spent 26 years as a structural engineer for Meridian Civil Group. Bridges, overpasses, load-bearing frameworks for buildings that are still standing in 4 states. I was not the loudest man in any room I ever entered. I was the one they called when the loudest man's calculations didn't add up. I retired at 58, not because I had to, because Seraphine's heart had started giving her trouble, and I had enough, more than enough, and there was nowhere I needed to be more than beside her. The house on Callaway Drive had been ours since that summer of 1979. I bought the lot for cash, $31,000. Every dollar saved over 6 years of deliberate, disciplined living. The construction cost me another $58,000. Supervised personally, every contractor vetted, every beam signed off by me before it was covered by drywall. Seraphine chose the kitchen tiles. I chose the windows, double-paned, south-facing, to keep the heating bills low in winter. We were not flashy people. In the garage, I still had the original workbench I'd built the first winter we moved in. Belt sander, table saw, hand planes hanging in order of size on a pegboard, Caius had helped me install when he was 9 years old. He'd been proud of that pegboard for months, showed every friend who came through the door. In the back garden, Seraphine's rose beds were still there. 7 varieties. She'd kept a journal of every one, when they bloomed, what they needed, what the soil wanted in different seasons. After she died, I kept the journal on the kitchen windowsill. I still read it sometimes, not for the gardening instructions. This was the home Vesper had decided was hers. She had lived in it for exactly 4 years, the years between Seraphine's death and now. She'd moved in after the funeral, said she was worried about me being alone. I had believed her. That is the thing about quiet people. We extend the same good faith we practice ourselves, and sometimes we extend it to people who have long since stopped deserving it. The signs had been there. I had chosen not to read them. The first sign came 3 months after Seraphine died, when Vesper boxed up her mother's rose journals without asking, and put them in the attic. Said the kitchen windowsill looked cluttered. I went up and got the journal back the same evening. Said nothing. The second sign came when she started referring to the house as our place, in conversations I wasn't part of, but Verity would relay to me afterward over coffee. The third sign came the morning she told Caius, her own brother, that Dad was managing fine and didn't need anyone checking in on him separately. She wasn't protecting me. She was managing the narrative. And I had let her, because I was grieving, and because I trusted that blood meant something, and because I had not yet understood that Vesper had confused my silence for blindness. Has someone ever mistaken your patience for weakness, your quiet for helplessness? Drop a comment below. I want to hear your story. And keep watching, because what happens next is the moment Vesper makes the mistake that changes everything. There is a particular kind of disrespect that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with a raised voice or a slammed door. It comes quietly, incrementally, dressed in the language of concern. It sounds like helpfulness. It looks like care. And by the time you recognize it for what it has already rewritten the story of who you are in the minds of everyone around you. Vesper had been doing this for 11 years. I can trace it back to a specific afternoon in October of 2013. Seraphine was in the early stages of her heart condition, not serious yet, or so we thought, and Vesper had come for Sunday lunch. After we ate, I stepped into the garage to return some tools. When I came back inside, I heard Vesper's voice carrying from the kitchen. "Mama, you know Dad can't manage money. He never could. Let me look at your accounts, just to make sure everything is organized properly." I stood in the hallway for a long moment. Seraphine's response was gentle but firm. "Your father built this house, Vesper. He built everything we have. I think he can manage." "That was a long time ago," Vesper said. I went back into the garage and stood at my workbench for 20 minutes doing nothing, organizing nothing, just standing. That line, "that was a long time ago," became the foundation of everything Vesper did afterward. In her mind, the man who had engineered load-bearing structures for a living, who had built a trust worth over $1 million, who had raised 2 children and kept a garden alive and loved one woman faithfully for 39 years, that man was a relic, a past-tense person, someone whose contributions had an expiry date. She never said it that plainly again. She didn't need to. It was in every conversation she steered, every decision she gently redirected, every time she spoke for me in a room where I was perfectly capable of speaking for myself. When Seraphine's condition worsened in 2019, Vesper inserted herself into every medical conversation. She came to appointments I had attended alone for years. She asked the doctors questions I had already asked, as if my version needed verification. She told Seraphine's sister Orla that Dad was in denial about how serious things were. I was not in denial. I had read every paper the cardiologist had given us. I had a binder. But Vesper needed a role, and the role she had chosen was the competent one. which required, by contrast, that I be the incompetent one. When Seraphine died in March of 2021, Vesper moved through the grief like a project manager. Funeral arrangements, estate paperwork, phone calls to extended family. Efficient. Controlled. She told people I was not coping well, when what I was actually doing was sitting in Seraphine's garden at 6 in the morning, reading her rose journal, and allowing myself to feel the full weight of 39 years of love coming to an end. That is not failing to cope. That is what coping actually looks like. Caius understood. He'd call on those mornings, sometimes just to be on the phone together without speaking. He was his mother's son in that way. He knew that presence mattered more than words. Vesper did not call on those mornings. Vesper called in the afternoons to ask practical questions about account access and whether I had updated my will. When Caius died 14 months ago, a rainy Tuesday, a highway, a truck that didn't stop in time, I felt something in me go quiet in a way I had no language for. He was 53 years old. He had Seraphine's laugh and my stubbornness, and a life he had built carefully and well. Vesper arrived at my door 4 hours after the police left. She had a notepad. I should have understood then exactly what was coming. Have you ever watched someone you love slowly rewrite who you are, and stayed quiet because you thought it would pass? Tell me in the comments, because some of us are just now realizing how long we've been holding our breath. The morning after Caius's funeral, Vesper came to my kitchen at 8 o'clock sharp. Not 8ish. 8 exactly. I know, because I heard her key in the front door. Caius's key, the one I had given him 20 years ago and never asked back. At the precise moment the kitchen clock ticked to the hour, she had the punctuality of someone who had rehearsed this conversation in the mirror. I was at the table with my coffee, the same chair I had sat in every morning for 45 years. The wood was worn smooth on the right armrest from decades of my elbow resting there. I had been awake since 4. I had not slept well since the highway. I did not expect to sleep well for some time. Vesper set a manila folder on the table without greeting me. "We need to talk about your situation," she said. There was that word, situation, as if my life were a problem requiring a solution. She sat down across from me, not beside me, across, and opened the folder. Inside was a printed document, 2 pages, single-spaced, with dates highlighted in yellow. "I've put together a transition timeline," she said. "I think 30 days is more than reasonable, given everything. It gives you time to look at senior living options without feeling rushed." I looked at the document. She had actually printed a timeline. Column 1, dates. Column 2, tasks. Week 1, begin researching assisted living facilities. Week 2, begin sorting personal belongings. Week 3, notify relevant institutions of address change. She had typed my life into a checklist. "There's a place called Heronwood Gardens, about 12 minutes from here," she continued, pulling out a brochure she had printed from a website. "Independent living, not assisted, so you'd still have your own space. Studio starts at $1,100 a month. I think with your Social Security that's manageable if you're careful." I turned the brochure over in my hands. Heronwood Gardens. A photograph of a dining room with round tables and floral centerpieces. A photograph of a woman in her 80s doing a seated yoga class. "And the house?" I asked. "I'll take care of the house." "What does that mean?" She folded her hands on the table with the patience of someone explaining something to a person who is slow to understand. "It means I'll handle the property, the bills, the maintenance. Everything Caius was handling for you. You won't need to worry about any of it." I set the brochure down carefully. "What makes you think Caius was handling things for me?" "Because I'm not blind, Dad." Her voice had an edge of exhaustion in it, as if she had been carrying this truth for years and was finally relieved to set it down. "You're 67 years old. You're on a fixed income. This house is over 2,400 square feet on a double lot. The property taxes alone are $9,200 a year. I know Caius was covering that. I know he was covering the utilities, the insurance, the upkeep. He told me." "Did he?" "Yes, he did. And I'm not going to pretend I can absorb all of that on top of my own expenses. It's not realistic. So the house transfers to me as part of the estate, which is what Caius would have wanted, and you move somewhere more appropriate." More appropriate. I picked up my coffee. It had gone cold while she was talking. I drank it anyway. "Vesper," I said. In 45 years of owning this house, did you ever once see Caius write a check for the property taxes? She blinked. He handled things online. Did you ever see a bank transfer? A statement? Any document showing his name connected to this property's finances? We didn't discuss the details. That's not the point. What is the point? She closed the folder. The point is that you are a 70-year-old man, 67, living alone in a house you cannot afford on your own. And I am trying to help you transition with dignity before this becomes a legal and financial crisis. She slid the timeline across the table toward me. November 22nd, that's the date I've circled. That's your target. She said your target the way you say it to someone who has no say in the matter. I looked at the circled date. Then I looked at my daughter, this woman I had taught to ride a bicycle on the driveway outside, whose university education I had funded without her ever knowing the full amount, whose wedding I had paid for with a single transfer from a trust account she didn't know existed. All right, I said. Vesper gathered her folder and stood up, smoothing her jacket with the satisfied efficiency of someone who had just closed a difficult meeting. She was halfway to the door when I spoke again. You might want to keep that timeline somewhere safe, I said quietly. She turned. Why? You'll want to refer back to it, for context. She studied my face for a moment, looking for something to read. She found nothing useful. That has always been my greatest advantage. I do not leak. She left. The front door closed with a soft, certain click. I finished my cold coffee. Then I got up, opened the basement door, and turned on the light. It was time to visit the filing cabinet. Has anyone ever handed you a timeline for your own life? As if your story was theirs to edit? As if your silence meant you had no answer? Tell me in the comments. And stay with me, because what I found in that basement is the moment this entire story turns. The basement smelled the way it always had. Concrete and cedar and the faint mineral trace of the well water that had fed this house since 1979. Seraphine used to say the basement smelled like the foundation of our life together. She wasn't wrong. Everything that mattered, every document, every record, every proof of what we had built, lived down here in 4 steel drawers beneath a single fluorescent light that hummed quietly when it warmed up. I had not been down here since the summer. I pulled the cord on the light and stood for a moment, letting my eyes adjust. The workbench along the far wall, the shelving units I had built from oak in 1991, the pegboard where Caius and I had hung the hand tools in 1988. Everything still in its place, the outlines I had traced in black marker, so we always knew where each tool belonged. Caius had thought that was the most ingenious thing he had ever seen. At 9 years old, he'd told his teacher about it. I stood at the workbench for just a moment. Then I went to the cabinet. 4 drawers. Steel, Battleship Gray, a brand called Pendaflex I had bought from an office supply store in 1983, because they were built to last and I did not intend to replace them. Each drawer labeled on the outside with a strip of white tape in my own handwriting. Property, financial, legal, personal. I opened the property drawer first. The first folder was labeled 447 Callaway Drive, Real Estate. Inside, in chronological order, beginning at the front. The original land purchase agreement. March 3, 1979. Buyer, Leander J. Ashford. Purchase price, $31,000. Payment method, cashier's check. No mortgage, no cosigner. The construction contract, Meridian Build Partners. $58,400 for a custom colonial, 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, double-car garage with integrated workshop. Start date April 1979. Completion October 1979. The original deed. Recorded October 14, 1979. County of Harlow, Ohio. Owner, Leander J. Ashford. Sole owner, no encumbrances, no liens. I set these 3 documents on top of the cabinet and kept going. Behind them, 45 years of property tax receipts. Every single one paid by Leander J. Ashford from Leander J. Ashford's accounts. Annual amounts that had grown from $1,100 in 1980 to $9,200 in 2024. The exact number Vesper had cited that morning with such confidence, as if she had researched it, as if knowing the number meant she understood who had been paying it. Behind the tax receipts, insurance policies, renewed without interruption since 1979. Utility connection agreements from 1979 still in the file. Every major maintenance contract, the roof in 1998, the HVAC system in 2007, the foundation waterproofing in 2012, all in my name, all paid from my accounts. Caius's name appeared nowhere in this drawer. Not once, not on a single page. I closed the property drawer and opened the legal drawer. At the back, behind the standard documents, the will, the power of attorney, the healthcare directives, was a folder I had not opened in several years. It was labeled in capital letters underlined twice. Ashford Family Trust, private. I carried it to the workbench and opened it under the light. The trust agreement was dated June 9, 1977, 2 years before we broke ground on this house. 2 years before Caius existed anywhere except in our conversations about the future, Seraphine and I had established it with the help of a trust attorney named Gerald Foss, who had since retired, and whose son now ran the same firm, the Leander and Seraphine Ashford Family Trust. I turned to the financial summary page, updated quarterly by our account manager at Harlow First National. I found the most recent statement, dated November 1, 2024. Current trust balance, $1,147,320. I set the page down. I picked it up again and read the number a second time, not because I had forgotten it, because sometimes you need to read a thing twice when someone has spent the morning telling you that you cannot afford your own life. $1,147,320. I turned to the beneficiary structure page. Caius was listed as a lifetime income beneficiary, meaning he received distributions from the trust during his life, for education, housing support, personal development, and family expenses. The trust had funded his university degree, his first car, the down payment on his apartment, and the annual contributions I had quietly made to his retirement account since he turned 30. He had known I helped him. He had thanked me, privately, many times. What he had never fully understood, because I had never needed him to, was the scale of what I was working with. He assumed I was a careful retired engineer, living modestly on savings and a pension. He was right about the modest living. He was not right about the reason for it. I found the last document I was looking for at the very back of the folder. Caius Ashford, Life Insurance Policy, issued 2001. Face value, $200,000. Renewed annually. Current status, active. I turned to the beneficiary page. Primary beneficiary, the Leander and Seraphine Ashford Family Trust. Not Vesper, not an estate, not a person whose name began with V and ended with a printed timeline and a brochure for Heronwood Gardens. The trust, which meant me. Vesper had spent 6 weeks making plans for $200,000 that had never belonged to her. She had been spending it in her imagination. I could see it in the way she'd spoken that morning. The confidence of someone who already knew what they had and was simply managing the logistics of collecting it. I closed the folder. I turned off the workbench light. Upstairs, I made myself a ham sandwich on the bread Verity had brought over after the funeral. I cut it diagonally, the way Seraphine always had, and I sat at the kitchen table and ate it without hurrying. Vesper had given me until November 22nd. It was November 4th. I had 18 days and $1,147,320 and 45 years of impeccable documentation. I was in absolutely no hurry at all. Have you ever held the truth quietly while someone talked over you, knowing exactly what you had and choosing your moment? Tell me in the comments, because the next step Leander takes is the one that changes everything, and it starts with a phone call to a woman named Corinna. Corinna Voss had been my attorney for 27 years. She had handled the trust amendments after Seraphine's diagnosis. She had processed Seraphine's estate with the precision and discretion of someone who understood that grief and paperwork arrive at the same time, and neither waits for the other. She had sent me a handwritten card 3 days after the funeral that said simply, "Leander, the documents are filed. Take your time with everything else." I had kept the card in the personal drawer of the filing cabinet. I called her office at 9 o'clock on a Wednesday morning. Her assistant put me through in under a minute. Leander. Her voice was the same as it had been for 27 years. Direct, unhurried. carrying the particular calm of someone who has seen enough to know that most situations, however urgent they feel, have a solution. I heard about Caius. I'm very sorry. Thank you, Corinna. What do you need? That was one of the things I had always valued about her. No preamble, no performance of concern, stretched thin over the surface of a billable hour. Just what do you need? I need to meet, I said. I have some documents to bring. Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. Bring everything. I arrived with 3 folders: the property documents, the trust file, the insurance policy. I set them on the mahogany desk between us and watched her read in the methodical, unhurried way she had always read. Front to back, nothing skimmed, a yellow legal pad open beside her for notes. When she finished, she set down her pen and looked at me over her reading glasses. Your daughter believes she has inherited this property and the insurance proceeds. She does. And she has given you a written timeline for vacating your own home. She printed it, 2 pages. Corinna was quiet for a moment. In 27 years, I had learned to read her silences. This one was the kind that comes just before a very precise question. Leander, why did you wait 6 weeks? I had expected this. I wanted to understand how far she would go. And she went far enough. Corinna nodded slowly. She made a note on her legal pad. What do you want to do? I had thought about this carefully. Not in the reactive, immediate way of someone who has been wounded and wants relief. In the structural way, the way I used to approach a bridge design, thinking about load distribution, about where the stress points were, about what needed to hold and what needed to give. 4 things, I said. Corinna's pen was ready. First, I want the life insurance claim filed immediately. The proceeds go to the trust, where they belong, and Vesper is formally notified that she is not the beneficiary. Straightforward, I'll contact the insurer today. Second, I want Vesper served with formal notice that she is a tenant in my property. Not an owner, not an heir to the property, a tenant, with the same 30-day notice period she gave me. A slight movement at the corner of Corinna's mouth, not quite a smile, something more restrained than that. Poetic, she said. Third, I want a complete legal summary of Caius's relationship to the trust, what he received, what he never owned, what Vesper may have misunderstood. Something she can read and cannot dispute. Done. Gerald Foss Jr. can prepare the summary. He knows the trust history better than anyone. Fourth, I paused. I want witnesses present when Vesper receives this information. Corinna set her pen down. Witnesses. The same people who watched her tell me to pack my bags at my son's funeral. I want them in the room when she learns what she actually inherited. Corinna studied me for a long moment. Leander, what you're describing, having this conversation in front of an audience, some people would call that public humiliation. Some people would, I agreed. I call it public education. There's a meaningful difference. Explain the difference to me. Vesper humiliated me to feel powerful. She did it in front of witnesses to make the story stick, so that Verity and Caius's friends and everyone who was in that room would walk away with a version of events that suited her. She used an audience as a tool. I picked up my coffee cup. I want to use the same audience to correct the record, not to damage her, to restore accuracy. Corinna was quiet again, a different kind of quiet this time, the kind that means the argument has landed. Where would this conversation take place? She asked. Her office, I said. She's a mortgage broker. She works with clients who trust her to understand property and ownership. Her colleagues should hear this. And if she refuses to meet? Then we serve the papers without explanation and let her read the truth alone. But I don't think she'll refuse. Vesper never turns down a room. Corinna picked up her pen, made 3 lines of notes. Then she looked up. Tom, I have been practicing law for 31 years, she said. She only called me Tom when she was being personal rather than professional. I have handled a great many family disputes, and I want to say something that is outside my role as your attorney. Go ahead. This isn't about the money, is it? It wasn't a question. No, I said. It's about what she said to Seraphine in 2013. It's about the rose journals in the attic. It's about 45 years of quiet work being dismissed as nothing by someone who confused my silence for absence. I set the coffee cup down. The money is simply the language the lesson has to be taught in, because it's the only language Vesper has ever taken seriously. Corinna closed her legal pad. I'll have everything ready by Friday, she said. We go Monday morning. I stood and shook her hand. Thank you, Corinna. Don't thank me yet, she said. Thank me after. As I walked to my car, I thought about Vesper in her office at that moment. Arranging client files, planning renovations in her mind, spending insurance money that was already spent before she'd ever touched it. She had given me until November 22nd. We were going to visit her on November 11th. Have you ever had to decide between correcting someone privately or letting the truth speak in the same room where the lie was built? Drop a comment. I want to know what you would have done. And stay right here, because Monday morning arrives next. And what happens inside that office is something no one in that building will forget. Vesper's office was on the 4th floor of the Harlow Financial Center on Meridian Street. Premier Mortgage Associates. Glass door, brass lettering, a reception desk with a young woman who smiled at everyone who walked in with the practiced warmth of someone whose job depended on first impressions. The lobby had the particular smell of commercial spaces that take themselves seriously. Fresh carpet, filtered air, faint coffee from a machine that cost more than my first car. Corinna and I arrived at 10 o'clock exactly. I was wearing my gray wool suit, the one I had worn to Seraphine's funeral, and to Caius's, and to every occasion in the last 20 years that required me to be taken seriously in a room. It was not an expensive suit by any standard Vesper would recognize, but it was mine, and it fit the way a well-made thing fits when it has been yours long enough to know your shape. Corinna carried a leather briefcase. Inside it were 3 manila folders and a document that had taken Gerald Foss Jr. 4 hours to prepare. Every number verified, every date confirmed, every legal relationship between Caius and the trust laid out in language that could not be reinterpreted. The receptionist called Vesper's extension. We waited 90 seconds. Vesper appeared from a hallway to the left, wearing a charcoal blazer and the expression of someone who had been expecting a difficult conversation and had spent the weekend preparing for the wrong one. She saw Corinna's briefcase. Her eyes moved to mine. Something shifted behind them. Not fear exactly. Recognition. The recognition of someone who has been playing a game and has just understood, for the first time, that the other person knew the rules too. Dad. She kept her voice even. I didn't know you were bringing an attorney. This is Corinna Voss, I said. She's handled my legal affairs for 27 years. We'd like a few minutes of your time, Corinna said pleasantly, and if some of your colleagues are available, we'd appreciate their presence as well. Vesper's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. This is a place of business. Yes, Corinna agreed, which is why we thought it the appropriate setting to discuss a property and insurance matter, given your professional context. Around the office, conversations had slowed. 3 agents at nearby desks were performing the universal pantomime of people pretending not to listen while listening to every word. Vesper led us to the conference room. She did not invite colleagues, but 2 followed anyway, drawn by the particular gravity of a situation that announces itself without announcing itself. One of them, I would learn later, was her branch manager. Corinna set the briefcase on the table and opened it without theater. She was not here to perform. She was here to document. Ms. Ashford, she began, we're here to clarify several material facts regarding the estate of your late brother Caius Ashford and the property at 447 Callaway Drive. I want to be straightforward so we use everyone's time efficiently. She opened the first folder and placed the original deed on the table. 447 Callaway Drive. Purchased March 1979. Recorded October 1979. Owner, Leander J. Ashford. Sole owner, no co-signers, no joint ownership, no mortgage. Your father paid cash for both the land and the construction. Vesper looked at the deed. She said nothing. Your brother Caius was never on this deed, Corinna continued, placing the property tax records beside it. 45 years of property tax records, all filed and paid by your father from his personal and trust accounts. Your brother's name does not appear in any property document connected to this address. The branch manager, standing just inside the doorway, glanced between the documents and Vesper. Corinna opened the second folder. The Leander and Seraphine Ashford Family Trust, established 1977. Current balance as of November 1st, $1,147,000. She placed the trust summary on the table. Caius Ashford was a lifetime income beneficiary of this trust. He was not a trustee, not a co-owner, and not an inheritor of trust assets. The financial support Caius provided to himself came, in substantial part, from distributions your father made to him from this trust. Your father was not financially dependent on Caius. The relationship ran in the opposite direction. The room was very quiet. Vesper's face had gone the particular pale of someone whose scaffolding is coming down piece by piece, and who has not yet decided whether to reach for something to hold on to, or simply let it fall. "The life insurance," she said. Her voice was smaller now, not gone, but smaller. Corinna opened the third folder. Caius Ashford. Life insurance policy, face value, $200,000. Primary beneficiary. She paused just long enough for the words to land cleanly. The Leander and Seraphine Ashford Family Trust. We have filed the claim. The proceeds will transfer to the trust within 10 business days. Vesper sat very still. One of the agents near the door shifted his weight. The branch manager said nothing, but I watched him look at Vesper with the particular expression of someone recalibrating something important. Additionally, Corinna said, placing the final document in front of Vesper, this is formal notice that 447 Callaway Drive is the sole property of Leander J. Ashford. As a current resident without ownership claim, you are considered a tenant at will. You are hereby given 30 days' notice to vacate. Effective today, November 11th. That gives you until December 11th. Vesper looked at the notice. She looked at me. I had not spoken a single word since we sat down. I had not needed to. That was the point. "Dad," she said, "I didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said quietly. "You didn't know because you didn't ask. You assumed. And then you built an entire structure on top of those assumptions and invited people into it." I glanced briefly at the branch manager, then back to her. "Some of those people are in this room." Vesper's eyes dropped to the table. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," I said, standing slowly and straightening my jacket. "You have 30 days and the truth. That's more than you gave me." I picked up my hat from the chair beside me. Seraphine had given it to me for my 60th birthday. I had worn it to every important occasion since. I walked to the door. Corinna followed, briefcase closed, every document left on the table where Vesper could read them as many times as she needed to. At the threshold I stopped. "Vesper," I said, without turning around. "The rose journals are on the kitchen windowsill. They've been there since 2021. I put them back the same evening you moved them." I walked out. The elevator doors closed behind us without a sound. Have you ever watched the truth do the work that anger never could? Have you ever stayed silent long enough for the facts to speak louder than any argument? Tell me in the comments, and keep watching, because the ripple from that conference room is only just beginning to reach the shore. Verity came to my door on Thursday morning with a casserole and information. She was like that. Verity. She had lived next door to us since 1981, had known Seraphine since the year we planted the first rose bed, had watched Caius grow from a boy on a bicycle to an engineer with a briefcase. She was 81 years old and moved through the world with the particular authority of someone who has outlasted enough nonsense to have no patience left for any of it. She set the casserole on the kitchen counter and sat in Seraphine's old chair without being asked. "You want to know what's happening?" I said. "I already know what's happening," she said. "I want to make sure you know what's happening." She had heard about Monday's meeting within 24 hours. This did not surprise me. Harlow was not a large city, and Premier Mortgage Associates was not a private island. 3 agents had been in or near that conference room. By Tuesday evening, the outline of what had happened had traveled through the professional network of the city's real estate and mortgage community with the efficiency of a system designed specifically to share information about risk. Vesper, Verity told me, had not come into the office on Wednesday. Her branch manager, the one who had stood in the doorway watching Corinna place documents on the table one by one, had requested a meeting with her Tuesday afternoon. The substance of that meeting was not available to Verity directly, but her neighbor's daughter worked in the building's shared administrative suite and had observed Vesper leaving the branch manager's office looking like someone who had been told something they could not unhear. 3 clients have asked to be reassigned, Verity said, pouring herself coffee from my pot without asking, which she had been doing for 40 years. I heard this from Dorothea Klein, whose son-in-law is buying a house through that office. He called Monday evening and said he'd seen something at the office that made him want a different agent. I didn't intend for this to affect her professionally, I said. Verity looked at me over her cup. Leander, she's a mortgage broker. Her entire value to clients is her judgment about property. The fact that she didn't understand who owned a house she had lived in for 4 years, that's not something you did to her. That's something she did to herself. She was right. I knew she was right. But there is a difference between knowing something and being entirely comfortable with it, and I sat with that difference for a moment before setting it down. By Friday, 2 more things happened. The first, a man named Stellan Briggs called my home telephone. He had been Caius's closest friend from university, had been at the funeral, had stood in my living room eating a sandwich Vesper had organized while Vesper told him I was struggling to accept the new reality. He called to apologize. "She told all of us you were dependent on Caius," he said. His voice had the strained quality of someone choosing honesty over comfort. "She said Caius had been carrying you financially for years, that the house was his, and you'd been living there on his generosity." A pause. "I should have asked you directly. I'm sorry, Leander." "You believed what you were told by someone you had no reason to doubt," I said. "That's not a character flaw, Stellan. That's just how stories work when only one person is telling them." He was quiet for a moment. "Caius used to talk about you, you know. Not about supporting you. About what you'd taught him, how you'd built the house, the trust, the way you managed things quietly." Another pause. "He was proud of you." I thanked him and sat with the phone in my hand for a while after we hung up. The second thing, Corinna called Friday afternoon. "Vesper has retained an attorney," she said. "His name is Philip Okafor. He contacted me this morning." "What does she want?" "She'd like to remain in the property past December 11th. She's proposing a 6-month extension at $1,400 a month." I looked out the kitchen window at Seraphine's rose beds. The November light was flat and gray, and the roses had been cut back for winter. The beds mulched the way Seraphine's journal said to do it, in the 3rd week of October. $1,400, I said. "Market rate for that property is closer to $3,200, Corinna said. "I checked comparable rentals in the Callaway district this morning." "Tell Mr. Okafor that Leander Ashford is willing to consider a tenancy arrangement," I said. "Market rate. 1st month, last month, and a security deposit up front. That's $9,600 before she moves anything in. If she'd like to negotiate from there, I'm available." A brief silence on Corinna's end. "And if she can't manage that? Then December 11th stands, and I wish her well." Corinna called back Monday morning. Vesper could not manage the upfront requirement. She would be out by December 11th. She was, Corinna told me carefully, also in conversations with the branch at Premier Mortgage about her future there, and those conversations had not resolved in her favor. I did not feel triumphant when I heard this. I want to be precise about that. Triumph implies that you wanted someone to lose. What I had wanted was something more specific and more quiet than that. I had wanted the record corrected. I had wanted the people who had been handed a false version of my life to have access to the true one. What Vesper lost, she lost to consequences. Not to me. There is a difference. It matters. What I felt, sitting at my kitchen table on that Monday morning with the November light coming through the window Seraphine had chosen in 1979, was something closer to stillness. The particular stillness of a structure that has been tested and has held. Have you ever watched someone face the natural consequences of their own choices and felt not victory, but simply relief? That the truth had been heavy enough for long enough? Tell me in the comments, because there is one chapter left, and it is the one I did not expect. The knock at my door 3 weeks later that changed how I understood everything that had come before it. She came on a Sunday. I know it was a Sunday because I had been to church that morning, the same church Seraphine and I had attended since 1982, the one with the cracked stone step at the entrance that the congregation had been discussing repairing for 11 years and had not yet repaired. I found that step oddly comforting. Some things persist simply because they belong where they are. I had come home, made lunch, and was sitting in the living room with Seraphine's rose journal open on my knee, not reading it exactly, more resting with it, when the doorbell rang at 2:30. I was not expecting anyone. Vesper was standing on the porch with a cardboard box in both arms. She was not wearing her work clothes. She was wearing a gray wool sweater I did not recognize, and no jewelry, and her hair was down in a way I had not seen since she was young. She looked, for the first time in a very long time, like my daughter, rather than a version of herself she had constructed for professional purposes. The box was open at the top. I could see, even from the doorway, what was inside it. Caius's baby photographs. The ones in the red leather album Seraphine had kept on the bottom shelf of the bookcase, until Vesper had quietly relocated them to a storage box in the spare room, sometime in the last 4 years. Seraphine's recipe cards, handwritten, 3 by 5 inches, organized by category with small tabs, she had cut herself from cardboard and labeled in her careful cursive. And underneath those, wrapped in a piece of tissue paper, the small watercolor painting Caius had made at age 7 of the house on Callaway Drive. A child's version of it, the proportions imprecise, the windows too large, the garden improbably green, but recognizable, and signed at the bottom in the large, uncertain letters of a 7-year-old, Caius A. I had not known where that painting was. I had looked for it after Seraphine died. I opened the door wider. "Come in," I said. She carried the box to the living room and set it on the coffee table and stood beside it with her hands clasped in front of her, in a way that reminded me, unexpectedly, and with a force I had not prepared for, of the way she had stood as a child when she had done something wrong and knew it and was working out how to say so. I sat down. She remained standing for a moment, then sat across from me. We were quiet together for a little while. Outside, the November wind moved through the bare branches of the oak tree I had planted in 1983. Seraphine had named it. She named everything. "I found these when I was packing," Vesper said. "They're yours." "Thank you." She looked around the room, at the walls I had painted in 1991, and repainted in 2003, and repainted again in 2018. Always the same warm white Seraphine had chosen the first time. At the bookshelves I had built from walnut in 1995. At the framed photograph on the mantel, Seraphine and me on the front steps the day we moved in, October 1979, her hair long, my hair present, both of us squinting into the afternoon sun, with the particular happiness of people who do not yet know how much they are going to need what they are standing in front of. "It looks the same," Vesper said. "It is the same. I thought you might have changed things." "Why would I change things?" She had no answer for that. She nodded slowly, as if the absence of an answer was itself informative. "Dad," she said, "I owe you more than an apology." "You don't owe me a performance, Vesper. If you have something to say, just say it plainly." She looked at her hands. "I treated you like you were already gone, like you were a problem left over from a version of this family that was finished. And I did it while telling myself I was being practical, helpful." She paused. "I've been thinking about when that started, and I think I know." "October 2013, I said. She looked up. "You told your mother that I couldn't manage money." "That was a long time ago, you said." Vesper's face did something complicated. "You heard that." "I heard it. I chose not to address it at the time because your mother handled it well, and I thought it was a moment rather than a beginning." I looked at her steadily. "It was a beginning." No. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that the oak tree outside moved twice in the wind and the kitchen clock ticked through a full minute. "I'm moving to Millbrook," she said finally. "There's a firm there that offered me a position. Smaller office, different market, fresh start. I hope it goes well for you." "You mean that?" "I mean most things I say, Vesper. I always have." She looked at the photograph on the mantel, at Seraphine in 1979, squinting into the sun. "She trusted you completely," Vesper said. "I used to think that was because she didn't know any better, that she was from a generation that deferred to their husbands by default." She paused. "I understand now that she trusted you because you had given her 40 years of reasons to, and I had given you the opposite. There was nothing to argue with in that. I let it stand." "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Go ahead." "If I had come to you after Caius died, not with a timeline, not with a plan, just come to you and asked about the house, asked about the finances, asked what was true, instead of deciding what was true." She met my eyes. Would it have been different? I thought about Corinna's office, about the 3 manila folders, about the conference room on Meridian Street, and the branch manager in the doorway, and the documents laid on the table one by one. "Yes," I said. "It would have been entirely different. We would have sat in this kitchen, and I would have shown you the trust documents and explained Caius's relationship to them, and we would have figured out together what came next. I would have helped you. That was always the available version of this story. She absorbed that, nodded once. Respect isn't something you inherit, I said. I know you understand that now. I do. She stood and picked up her bag. I'm sorry it took what it took for me to learn it. I walked her to the door. And she paused on the porch, the same porch where she had told me to pack my bags 3 months ago, and turned back. Dad, the roses. Seraphine's journal says the climbing variety on the south wall needs the wire supports checked before February. I looked at her. Page 43, she said quietly. I read it once, when I first moved in, before I put it in the attic. A pause. I put it in the attic because reading it made me miss her, and I didn't know what to do with that. She went down the front steps and to her car. I watched her go. Then I went inside and closed the door. Not firmly, not with finality, just closed it the way you close the door to a room you intend to return to eventually, when the time is right. I carried the box to the kitchen table and unpacked it slowly. The red album, the recipe cards, the small watercolor, Caius's imprecise, luminous, 7-year-old rendering of this house. I propped the painting against the kitchen windowsill next to Seraphine's rose journal. They looked right there together. The house as a child had imagined it beside the garden as his mother had understood it. I made tea. I sat with it. Outside, the oak tree moved in the November wind, bare and rooted and entirely where it had always been. I thought about what I had learned in the 3 months since Caius died. Not about trust documents or property deeds or the mechanics of what happens when someone mistakes your quiet for absence. Those things had never been in question. What I had learned was something older and simpler. Quiet is not the same as gone. Patience is not the same as surrender. And the most important structures, the ones that hold the most weight, the ones that matter when everything else is tested, are built slowly, privately, without announcement, by people who understand that the work itself is the point. Seraphine had known that. Caius had learned it. Now Vesper was beginning to. And me, I had always known it. I had simply spent 3 months reminding myself that it was still true. If you have stayed with this story from the beginning, if something in it touched a place in you that recognized itself, then leave a comment. Tell me if you have ever been the quiet one in the room. Tell me if someone has ever confused your patience for weakness and what happened when they found out they were wrong. Tell me where you are in the world and what this story meant to you. And if you are someone who has treated a quiet person in your life like they were less than they were, it is not too late to make that right. Go find them. Ask the questions you should have asked. Because quiet people remember everything, and the ones worth knowing will still be there. Hit the like button if this story moved you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to Dorian's Revenge Stories, because every week we bring you another story about quiet strength, earned respect, and what happens when the truth finally gets the floor. Until next time, quiet doesn't mean weak. It just means selective.